Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 9 of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, called Vox. And I do have a few issues with the episode, there are a few logical problems with it, but overall I do think it's good. And the final scene is probably the most perfect scene in all of Star Trek, and it did hit me right in the feels. I'm not ashamed to admit I even shed a few tears watching it because, I grew up on TNG. I watched it since I was 7 years old, and so the final scene is something I predicted will happen, but I didn't expect it to make me so emotional. It almost makes me want to give this episode a 10 out of 10, but I do have a few other issues with the rest of the episode, and so therefore it will be a 9 out of 10 in the end. Still overall good, but not entirely perfect. The final scene was perfect in every way, in my opinion. I mean, the details of it are just amazing. I'm tempted to do an imitation of Fajo when he was being all excited like a little kid when seeing Data and all of that. That was my reaction in that scene. I was kind of jumping and saying, the detail! And so it was just perfect. So anyway, I just had to get it out of the way and talk about that scene first because it did affect me strongly. But now let's go back to the beginning and analyze the whole episode because I do have some nitpicks to do. So the episode begins with Troy's therapy session with Jack Crusher. She's telepathically going into his mind to help him open the red door and all of that. And I was worried they're going to drag this mystery for another episode or until the very end of this episode. So because they showed in the sneak peek that she sees what it is but doesn't tell him but run away and all of that. So I was really worried they're going to drag this out even longer. But luckily the pacing in this episode is much better finally, and so even though she did initially run away from him, but then she immediately goes to Picard and Beverly and does tell them immediately what she saw, and then they show it to us, and so they didn't drag it out too long. And I made many videos with theories of what it might be, but my most popular video on the Major Green channel was the one predicting that it's going to be the Borg. I basically collected all the clues from the entire season and also some scenes from TNG and First Contact, showing it back to back. And when I was making that video myself, I was kind of remembering things as I was doing it, and so I kept adding more and more things, and I actually missed a few bits. There was a scene in the previous episode when Jack told Vadik there's really no point in resisting, but he said it so casually inside his dialogue that I didn't even notice it the first time. So anyway, I do like the way that they did have a whole bunch of clues throughout the whole season, but they made them all vague enough so that we wouldn't guess it right away or wouldn't be sure. But when I made that video putting all the clues together, I did pretty much know that's going to be the big reveal, that it's the Borg basically. Even though I kept making more videos with the other theories, I was trying to make them as quickly as possible before this episode because I knew it will not be relevant later on, so I was in a hurry to release all those videos of them opening the door and it's something else each time, some other villain from Star Trek and all of that. And overall I do think it makes sense for it to be the Borg. First of all those other potential villains didn't have like a personal connection to Picard. Picard is the main character of the show, so it would make sense also for the more casual viewers, because not every viewer of this show will be such a hardcore Trekkie that he will recognize some minor villain from some previous episode and all of that. So the Borg is something that everyone knows about, and so it made sense for it to be the Borg, and also the way they did it overall I think does work. It is a little bit silly in places and there are some logical problems which I will get to in a moment, but overall I kind of like it. And there was an episode in Voyager called Dark Frontier in which Seven goes back to the collective, and then the Queen is telling her that because humanity is so hard for them to assimilate, that they're planning to use some more sneaky tactic to do it in an unconventional way, and she was talking about creating some kind of virus to infect all the humans without them knowing and all of that. So that actually fits perfectly what we see in this episode. So in short, the Borg use the transporters of every ship in the fleet to put a little bit of Borg DNA in every person who uses the transporters, which means most of people, even though it didn't affect the old ones. They explained that it only affected the younger generation. And I'm guessing not every single person used the transporter. Maybe there are people like Barclay or Pulaski who didn't like transporters, and so there will probably be some more resistance in the next episode, but most people on those ships were infected with some Borg biological components, which makes them susceptible to being hacked from afar basically, and Jack is like the transmitter who can take them over. And my biggest issue with the episode is the choice that Jack makes, that after he's told the truth, he decides to run away and go to the Borg. And he apparently does it from his own free will. I guess we can justify it by saying that his plan is to kill the Queen, and so he's not going to join her willingly and all of that. But still, in the end, because of him, thousands of people have died, because apparently the Borg would not have been able to do that without him. So he basically gave himself up to them after they spent the whole season running away from the villains. To protect him, he just decides by himself to give himself over to the villains. So he does go there with the intent to kill the Queen, which is kind of stupid also, because shouldn't he know that the Queen cannot really be killed, because every time she's been killed in the past, she always comes back, and so his whole plan is kind of stupid and pointless, and in the end he's unable to kill her, because I guess it's also programmed into him that he's unable to do it, or the Queen is telepathically manipulating him because he's now so close to her and all of that. So in the end, his plan doesn't work, and they assimilate him, and that allows them to make their plan work. Remember, they said in the whole season that they cannot make it work without him. That's why I was saying in my previous review, why don't they just run away and hide somewhere, and then the villains wouldn't be able to make their plan work. So just hide until after Frontier Day at least, to sabotage their plan, because the villains kept saying, we have to have Jack Crusher for it all to work and all of that. So his choice to go to the villains, who then catch him and use him for their plan, makes him responsible for all the thousands of people who die after this, and so that makes his character kind of irredeemable, even if his intention was just to kill the Queen and all of that. So after he couldn't, why doesn't he kill himself to prevent the Borg from getting him, when he knows they might destroy humanity and all of that? So all of this makes his character responsible for every single death that happens as a result, and so that makes him irredeemable. So we can say it was stupidity, it wasn't his evil intentions, but still it makes him responsible. So that's a huge problem, I think. I don't think they're going to kill his character in the end. Probably he's going to be saved, because he's kind of like Picard's legacy, his only child and all of that. And so I don't think they will kill him in the end, but I cannot look at him seriously after this. They should have done all of this differently, that he's been mentally manipulated by the Queen from afar, and so he's not entirely responsible for his actions and all of that. They should have shown it more in this episode, then that will be more forgivable later on, to say that he wasn't fully in control of himself, that's why he made this stupid decision. But that's not the way they showed it in this episode. In this episode, after Picard tells him that he's basically part Borg, and tells him they're going to put him into an institution or something, why are they thinking such in long term? Why not first solve the immediate problem? Just go and hide him somewhere so the Borg cannot get him in time for the Frontier Day plan and all of that. So it was very stupid. The way they kind of scared him into running away to the enemy, and also the way they didn't take any precautions with him is also silly. You know, they did send a few guards to guard his room, but then he just takes them over and escapes the ship, and so that was also kind of silly. If they know that he's so dangerous, you know, they could have done it in a more interesting way, and maybe they should have done something like that Gary Mitchell character from TOS, that friend of Kirk who gained superpowers, which kind of made him go insane with a god complex, and then Kirk was in a dilemma what to do with him and all of that. So it could have been a whole episode, and they should have shown more that it's the Borg influence on him that is making him evil, not his own choice the way it was shown in this episode. And so he steals the shuttle and escapes, and they're unable to track the shuttle because he disengaged the transponder or something, and that's also extremely stupid. They should have said that he stole that shuttle with the cloaking device, which we saw earlier, then it would make more sense why they cannot track him. And also the way that distances don't mean anything in this show is something I complained about, and it happens again in this episode, because they can get anywhere they want as quickly as the plot needs for it to happen, in a way that doesn't make sense. Maybe in the end of the season I'll make like a diagram schematic of how long it took them to get to every place and how it contradicts itself in following episodes. It doesn't make sense in the end. So he immediately gets to where the Borg are hiding in some nearby nebula. And later on, the Titan goes to Earth and then goes back to the Fleet Museum. And by the time they get from Earth to the Fleet Museum, all of Starfleet have been taken over. And so why are they not destroying Earth? Like with 1,000 ships in orbit, they can easily destroy Earth in the time it takes for the TNG crew to get to the Fleet Museum. I guess it took them only a few minutes to get there, because, you know, when they arrive, they seem to be surprised that they got there, and then Picard asks Geordi, "What are we doing at the Fleet Museum?" And then Geordi says, "We need the ship." And so how long were they on this shuttle heading to the Fleet Museum, if only when they arrived there, they asked Geordi, "What are we doing here?" So how long exactly did it take them to get from Earth to the museum? If only when they get there, they ask Geordi where they're going. So if it took them a while to fly there, were they all silent during the ride and no one ever asked Geordi, where exactly are you taking us exactly? And so it makes it seem as if they can get anywhere in the galaxy in a few seconds, almost like the sport jump in Discovery. So that is something that is annoying me because it doesn't make sense, and they could have done it differently. Just write the dialogue differently. Just make Picard ask Geordi where they're going while they're still at warp, and then show them arriving, and then have the rest of the scene. And so it is stuff that can be easily fixed with editing, and yet they don't, and so that is annoying to me. And Jack somehow knows how to find the Borg, I guess telepathically communicating with the Queen, and so he immediately finds them in some nearby nebula. And the Borg cube there has what appears to be antennas on top, I guess because they're going to make the transmission to take over all the infected Starfleet people. So the audience wouldn't get it unless we see actual antennas. And we did have an interior shot of some device inside the cube that is making the transmission. That was kind of a cool shot, and it also kind of looks like in the style of Viger from the motion picture, and so I did like that. So there are a lot of stuff in this episode that I did like and enjoyed, but I just wish they would have fixed those issues I have with the logic and the common sense stuff, like how does it take them seconds to get from one star system to another, when other times it takes them a whole day or an hour and suddenly it takes them seconds. And so stuff like that is annoying to me, especially since they are on shuttles now. You know, when they were on the Titan, I was excusing it away by saying maybe the Titan has some super duper new engines that are quicker than any starship we've seen before, and that's how they're able to get from one place to another so quickly. And yet now they're using shuttles, and they also jump from one star system to another in seconds. And so it annoys me that it doesn't make sense. And also, if they do have such fast engines now that they can jump all over the galaxy and cannot be tracked and cannot be pursued, why don't they go and get some help from people that can help them? Like, why don't they go to Jurati, since Borg are involved and she has a huge Borg ship? Why didn't they try to contact her for help? Why don't they go to the Android planet? Why don't they go to the Klingons for help, to some other Federation planet? Like, it makes no sense that they were on the run this whole season, while at the same time having such quick engines that can jump anywhere in the galaxy in seconds. Also, it still annoys me how they keep saying this whole season that Starfleet is gathering its entire fleet in the Sol system, and when they finally show it to us in this episode, it does look like a bunch of ships, but it looks like a few hundred ships, maybe not thousands, not tens of thousands, and so it doesn't look as epic as was implied. They said that literally the entire Starfleet will be in the Sol system, which also makes no sense. Why would the Federation agree to leave all their borders undefended by sending every single ship to one location? They could have fixed it with some small changes in dialogue. Simply don't say the word the entire fleet, say most of the fleet. Something like that would have been okay. And also, if they do have so many ships in orbit, what chance does Earth has against them? If all those ships decide to bombard Earth, maybe Earth has such strong defenses that it will take them 1,000 ships, a few hours to get through them. I guess it's possible. Also, it was nice to see Admiral Shelby, but it's kind of funny at this point that every time they bring back some minor character from the old show, it's always to kill them off immediately, so that was also kind of funny. And there was also kind of a continuity error in some of her dialogue when she said that they are celebrating 250 years for the creation of Starfleet, ever since the launch of the NX-01, which is Archer's ship, but that ship, the Enterprise, was not the first ship in Starfleet. Starfleet existed for decades before that as well. So the dialogue makes no sense. Maybe they should have said that they're celebrating 250 years of the Federation, which I guess will mean that this season is taking place about 10 years after the previous season of Picard. But that will actually fit better in my opinion. You know, I always said that they should have set the Picard show a little bit more to the future, because, you know, humans in the future shouldn't really age as quickly as modern day humans, because with all the new medical technology it will make sense for them to age a little bit slower, especially since they visited the Baku planet and all of that stuff. And so I wouldn't have a problem with them saying that the characters are older than the actors. It will make sense. And also it will make more sense with the age of Jack's actor, who is almost 40 years old in real life, and yet he's playing a 20-something year old. And so it will fix a lot of issues if they simply said that this season is taking place 10 years after the previous season. And also it will make sense how the Borg had time to make their plan work, since apparently they've been sneaking around, secretly assimilating Starfleet personnel for a long time. And another logical problem is, why did they need Picard's body to be able to do it. I mean, if they say that the Borg are the ones who made those modifications to him in the first place, then wouldn't they know how to do it again without stealing his body? I guess we can explain it away by saying it was some kind of accidental mutation that the Borg were not planning for it to happen, or maybe it was some potential that Picard had already to have some telepathic abilities, you know, maybe because one of his ancestors was a professor at the school for gifted youngsters back on Earth in a time when there was rampant mutations, and so maybe something of that passed down to him from Xavier, and so I guess we can explain it away that Picard had that special ability about him specifically, and that's why the Borg had to get him and his body back, because they didn't have the blueprints to make it again. So it was never really explained in the show, so it's still a mystery, I guess. You know, there was that clue in the beginning in the first episode when that log was playing on Beverly's computer saying that Picard doesn't know why the Borg have a special interest in him. And so I assume that that's going to be the explanation, that the Borg somehow found out that Picard had that special ability to control people from afar, and they wanted to use that. Maybe that's why they wanted to make him into Locutus. But the way that this episode explains it is that they are the ones who did it to him, that they changed his DNA, and that is something that was mentioned in Best of Both Worlds, that the DNA is being rewritten. And in the end of that episode, they said that it comes back to normal, but I guess he didn't come back all the way back to normal. And so he was like a transmitter of Borg signals, which does explain those scenes in the movie First Contact, when he seemed to be able to hear the Borg telepathically, even though he doesn't have any nanoprobes or technology in him anymore, and yet still he could hear them. I guess he just thought he was crazy, and that's why he didn't tell anyone. That's why no one investigated it further. But I do like the way that this show explains away something that was unclear about the movie. It's a way to add something to the canon to explain away previous illogical things. And so that's something I do like. And so they explained that he passed it down to Jack. And Jack was born with the same unusual structure in his brain, which they mistaken for a Iromodic syndrome, which it did eventually kill Picard, right? So why did it kill him if it wasn't really Iromodic syndrome? So there is a lot of convolutedness about all of this, but I do like the way that it explains away that unanswered mystery in First Contact. Why was Picard able to hear the Borg? So Jack has similar abilities, but he's also able to transmit himself to the other Borg, which Locutus was not able to do organically. He was only a receiver, but Jack is superior to him, I guess, and so that's why the Borg want him. So the only logical problem I have with all of this is, if the Borg are the ones who made all of this in the first place, why cannot they simply do it again with some other Borg drone? If you need another generation to improve that ability, just get a Borg drone laid with another Borg drone to produce a Borg baby, which you will then have immediately with that new brain structure you need for the transmission. And so why the need to chase Jack around the galaxy? And weren't there any other former Borg drones who had children except for Picard? Are you telling me he's the only former Borg who ever had a child with someone? No other freed Borg ever had children with anyone, and so it doesn't really make sense. And so all of this wasn't really fully explained to my satisfaction, unfortunately, and also it doesn't really make sense why would the changelings want to help the Borg defeat humanity if they know that the Borg are planning to take over the entire galaxy in the end. So wouldn't they know that they will also eventually want to assimilate all the changelings, and so why would they want to help them out? Are they really so angry against the Federation and Starfleet that they're helping out a bigger enemy which will also go after them later? I guess we now know why Vadik didn't want to use the transporters in that episode when she boarded the Titan. Maybe because she knew that maybe the Borg also hacked their own transporters and didn't want them to do any modifications to them to control them as well, and that's why she avoided using it. But in other episodes we did see changelings using transporters as well. And also, how did Vadik know that Jack is seeing the red door in his visions? How could she possibly know that unless the Borg told it to her? I guess that floating face was actually the Borg Queen all along, and just using a male voice so that we wouldn't know who that is, even though Vadik knows that it's the Borg. And so I guess in their conversations, the Queen told Vadik that she's sending visions to Jack to try to lure him and giving him those images of the red door, and that's how Vadik knew about it. I guess we can explain that away. Or maybe there were other former Borg drones, children, that they were chasing around, and maybe all of them got the same vision, and that's how Vadik knew about it, and all the other ones simply were not compatible enough or something. So I guess we can explain all of that away. So I guess Picard's brain mutation was kind of an accident, not something the Borg planned initially, but after they discovered it, they did want to use it, and so they had to steal his body to get the exact blueprints of his brain tumor, and then use the transporters to plant the same thing in all the Starfleet personnel, but because the brain only develops until the age of 25, everyone older will not be affected by it. So the brain transmission will only be effective on the younger crew members. And it does make sense that in the previous episodes we only ever saw Jack taking over younger people. We never saw him use his powers on the older ones. So I guess it fits. It's kind of convenient that he never even tried to use it on someone older. Maybe he should have tried to demonstrate on one of them and then it wouldn't work and then they wouldn't believe him. You know, they could have played with it some more in a way that will make it all even more interesting in the end. So there were some missed opportunities, I think. And when Jack goes to meet the Borg Queen, we hear the voice of Alice Krieg, the original Borg Queen and the best one in my opinion, so I was really happy about that. Unfortunately, they never show her face, at least in this episode. Maybe they will in the next one. They only show the queen from behind. Maybe she didn't want to wear the makeup, or they didn't want to use, you know, the aging effects because it's too expensive. I don't know the reason, but at least they had her voice, and so I am happy about that, even if we don't get to see her face. And my only small issue with it was that at some part of her dialogue she starts kind of laughing maniacally like an evil villain witch and all of that, and it doesn't really fit the character of the Borg Queen, who is kind of robotic because, you know, she's a cyborg. She's not supposed to be behaving fully like a human and all of that. And so the whole idea of the Borg Queen was always a little bit problematic because it kind of contradicts the whole idea of the collective and all of that. So it was always an issue. And, you know, in First Contact, I justified it. I explained it away by saying maybe she's simply kind of a representation of the Borg, kind of like their spokesperson, and also kind of as a way, as a tool to try to get Data to cooperate with them in that movie. So that's the way I kind of explain it away in my head, that it's still a collective, it's not really like a dictator controlling all of them and all of that. And yet in this episode she starts kind of laughing maniacally like an evil witch because it's kind of cartoony and it doesn't fit the character. She didn't behave like that previously. Since when does she have a sense of humor to be laughing? And so that's my only issue with that scene. And also the way that Jack kind of gives up after he's unable to kill the queen. He doesn't even try to kill himself, and then those Borg tubes start approaching him, and it looks exactly like the tube in the Matrix that hooks up to your brain from behind. And when it stabs him, it doesn't even react. He doesn't even flinch from it, and so that also doesn't make any sense. And then his eyes turn black, and then the Borg are able to send that transmission. And so Jack is directly responsible for killing thousands of people. So how the hell can we respect that character after all of this? What they should have done is shown us that he's been manipulated by the Borg telepathy from afar, and that's why he escaped the ship, and then I will be fine with it. I guess we can explain it that it was what's happening behind the scenes, but they didn't really show it to us in this episode. And then they show us that the Borg transmission is taking over the bodies of all the younger crew members, even on the Titan. And then they get all those veins in their face and all of that. And that reminds me of that scene with the fake Tuvok changeling who turned into Riker, and Riker looked kind of like a corpse with veins in his face. And so I guess that was also foreshadowing what we now see with all these Borgified zombies looking exactly like that. And also those scenes when Jack was seeing people with the veins covering their face, now we see the same people with really similar veins on their face when they become Borgified. And so all the younger crew members become like Borg zombies, and then the older generation has to escape, and Captain Shaw heroically sacrifices himself to allow them to escape, and then before he dies he calls Seven by her chosen name, 7 of 9, giving her a respect before he dies, which kind of is strange, especially in the context when Borg are literally attacking you again and taking over the ship again. And that's the time he chose to call her 7 of 9 finally, so that was a little bit iffy. And then Seven and Raffi stay on the Titan for no reason. I guess to give them time to escape, you know, but the way it was shown, it doesn't really make sense. They did have time to go through that door as well. I guess it takes time to prep the shuttle, and that's why they had to stay in the corridor to fight off the Borg zombies again. You know, they do have experience with that. Didn't they fight Borg zombies in the previous season? And by the logic of the previous season, Seven and Raffi should easily be able to take over the ship back because, you know, in the previous season they were fighting hand to hand with Borgified soldiers with weapons when they only had a knife, and so they should be able to easily take back the ship, even if it means fighting hundreds of Borg zombies. So I guess we'll wait and see what they do with them. And how convenient is it that the only ones who are able to escape on the shuttle are the original TNG crew? That seems awfully convenient since they're now heading back to the Fleet Museum, which they get to in seconds apparently, because all the way there, no one bothered to ask Geordi where exactly are you taking us. And when they arrive there, they're surprised that why are we back at the Fleet Museum? And then Geordi says because we need the ship and I have a surprise for you. And so they show us the Deck 12 that was mentioned previously, which I predicted is going to be the Enterprise D, but I didn't expect to be so emotional in this scene, and I talked about it in the beginning. When they open the doors and we gradually see that it is indeed the Enterprise D, and then all the lights turned on, and then they go on the bridge, and the bridge is a perfect recreation of it, and the details were so perfect. And the irony is that even if it wasn't perfect, I would have been okay with it, because the bridge of the Enterprise D, as we saw in Generations, was already modified. It wasn't exactly like in the show. Then the saucer crashed, and so Geordi says that they recovered the saucer because of the Prime Directive, because there were inhabitants on the nearby planet. And I'm glad the way that he said to prevent contamination to the system and not to the planet. That means that they did pay attention to the detail of that movie, because they said in that movie that the nearby planet was inhabited, not the same planet they crashed on. That planet was actually uninhabited. And they didn't know that detail when they wrote this in, because Geordi says to prevent contamination to the system, not to the planet. And so they didn't know that detail, and I appreciate that. And so they recovered the Enterprise D, and Geordi reconstructed it. He used the drive section of some other ship. So anyway, if it's the same exact saucer that we saw crash in Generations, then the bridge of that ship was already modified from TNG, so it didn't have to be exactly the same. And yet the way they showed it in this episode, it looks exactly like in TNG. Down to the very last detail, and all the dialogue, all the lines, every single thing that every character says is brilliant. And there was also a joke when Geordi said they cannot use the Enterprise E, and then everyone looks at Worf, and then he says it wasn't my fault. And there is no canon explanation to it yet. I guess at some point Worf must have been the captain of the Enterprise E, and maybe it was destroyed on his watch, and that's why everyone looked at him and he says it's not my fault. And Worf has been a comic relief across this whole season, maybe a little bit too much in some places. And when they go on the bridge, he's the only one who's not really emotional by it, and he says that he prefers the Enterprise E because it had better weapons. And one small problem I had with the scene on my first viewing is that they all seem to take their sweet time admiring the bridge and all of that, and that's all lovely, but in the context of the episode, they all know that the Borg have just taken over the fleet above Earth and are going to wipe out all of humanity, and Geordi's daughters were also possessed and all of that. So why are they all so happy and joking around and taking their sweet time when they should be rushing to save humanity and all of that? So that's the only small issue I had with it. On my second viewing, I noticed that Geordi actually said to Worf that he got some drones to load the torpedoes into the ship, and so it makes sense that they need this time to prepare the ship. So as they're speaking on the bridge, there are automatic drones doing things to the ship to get it ready, and so that makes it more excusable. And also it explains the fact of why the ship would have weapons at all, because if it was meant to be simply a ship in a museum, why did Geordi arm it? And so I like this small line explaining that problem away by saying that he's currently doing it as they're boarding the bridge. And so his automatic drones are loading weapons onto the ship as they're having this conversation, and that explains why they're taking their time. So it's not as if nothing is happening and they're not in a rush, because they do need the time for the ship to be loaded with weapons. And so that explains that problem away. And so the scene overall, I think in the end, is perfect. I watched it a few times and it got me really emotional to watch it. I wish I would have recorded my live reaction to it, because as I told you many times, I grew up on this show. I watched it as a little kid, and I never imagined they will have such a lovely scene of literally reviving TNG. They're all sitting on their exact stations from the show and taking the ship out. And previously I was thinking maybe they will have a scene like that in the very end of the show, and it will be like a lovely send off, but we'll have a whole episode of them on that bridge, and every single one of them is in their old station. And it was funny how Data says hello to his chair and all of that, and even Geordi sits at his old helm station when he used to be the pilot in the first season of TNG. Even the computer voice was the same voice from TNG. Majel, rest in peace, is back as the ship's computer. And when Picard sits at the captain's chair, he's doing like a shirt tag even though he doesn't have a uniform on. And he also makes a joke about how the thing he missed most about those days is the carpet on the ship. That's kind of a poke at the new Trek shows that only have the shiny floors all the time. And even the lighting was good in this episode. It could have been dark, even in Generations also it was always darker than in the show. And yet here it looks almost as bright as it did in TNG. And then Picard says all his classic lines, make it so, engage, and all of that. And it could have been corny, it could have been silly, but it all felt organic and natural, and it all made sense overall. The only question I have is, why are they flying back to Earth? What exactly is one ship going to do against 1,000 ships of the enemy? Wouldn't it make more sense for them to try to locate the source of the Borg transmission and to take that out? Because that might free all the possessed crew members, so shouldn't they simply try to find the source of the Borg transmission and to rescue Jack and all of that? But instead they fly back toward Earth for some reason, so I guess we'll wait and see in the next episode, which I'm sure is going to be great. Seeing the TNG crew back on the Enterprise D in their old stations, so it's going to be good no matter what, I'm sure. So my final ranking for this episode is 9 out of 10. Almost perfect if not for the logical flaws of distances not meaning anything and Jack's stupid decision to give himself over to the enemy after they spent the whole season trying to hide him from the enemy, that he simply goes away and betrays them, which destroys his character. He cannot be redeemed after all of this, so that's a huge problem, and that's why I cannot give this episode a 10. Hopefully the next episode will be a complete 10 out of 10, I do hope so. So that's all I had to say about it for today. Let me know what you think and we can discuss all of this in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.